Uh-oh. Not me. Hi.
I am one of them and just belong. And they know I'm safe and do not compete.
You know, he tried to be a bear. He tried to act like a bear, and for us on the island, you don't do that.
Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Sid, and in today's video I am going to be talking about Timothy Treadwell. He is a man who lived alongside brown bears, weasels, wolves, moose, and foxes in the Katmai National Park in Alaska. And whenever I see his story resurge on social media, it always interests me, so I've finally decided to go down the rabbit hole. And I really didn't expect to end up making a video about it because it's one of those situations that have been talked about so much already, so I didn't want to just rehash stuff that has already been talked about a whole bunch of times. But as I went digging, I discovered that there is still a lot of meat left on the bone. So I will be getting into everything in this video. But first, I just want to say a big thank you to today's sponsor, Aura. Aura is a huge help when it comes to protecting your personal information online, because I'm sure everybody has received spam emails or robocalls before and wondered how they got your personal details to begin with. They got it because data brokers are making fortunes selling your information. But that is where Aura steps in. They can identify the data brokers exposing your personal information and submit opt-out requests on your behalf. Brokers are legally required to remove your information if you ask them to, but of course they don't make it easy. So Aura handles all of the back and forth for you. And apps like Aura have never been more important with all of the data breaches going on nowadays. There was a recent data breach at AT&T that saw over 73 million customers' data leaked onto the dark web. And Aura does so much more to protect you and your family from the online threats you can't see, and everything else they can do can be done by downloading their app. It's super easy to set up, and you don't need a whole bunch of different apps to get things like parental controls, antivirus, a VPN, and so much more. It's all in the one place at one affordable price, so you can either let people continue to exploit and profit off your private information, or you can go to aura.com/sid to start your 2-week free trial. Also linked at the top of the description box. Okay, so back to the video. So Timothy camped in the Katmai National Park for 13 summers from 1990 to 2003. But the summers from 1990 to 1998, he would set up his tent in just the Hallow Bay area. He called that place the Grizzly Sanctuary. It was made up of green, wide open spaces and was home to a dense population of bears. And that was exactly why Tim went to that area. But it was also a reason why bear guides, filmmakers, and photographers also went to that area. He too also photographed the wildlife. At the start, he would take photos with a basic point and shoot camera, which was nothing compared to what the other advanced photographers had, but he had something they didn't have. He was able to get incredibly close to the bears. When he first went to Alaska as a part of a bear tour group in 1989, he ventured away from the group to try and encounter some bears one-on-one. He ended up crossing paths with 3 bears, and each time they did, he started to sing. He published a book in 1997 titled Among Grizzlies, Living with Wild Bears in Alaska. In that book, he said that his singing may have communicated some kind of goodwill to them because they remained mostly indifferent to his presence.
I talk sweetly to them. Sometimes I sing songs to them.
I love you. I love you.
When you sing to an animal, you bring out the nice in you. You bring out the calm. You become gentle. Animals can pick up on that gentleness.
And when he returned to Alaska the following year to camp alone in Hallow Bay, he worked on being at one with the bears. He behaved like the bears and sometimes even got down on all fours.
Primarily, he did not act like a person. He would act like a bear. He would hide from bears. He would sneak up on bears. He would allow bears to get a lot closer than we would normally recommend people to do.
He would do things like rub himself with bear dung and strip himself down to where he actually felt like he was a bear. And at times he would grunt and talk like a bear.
He gave a whole bunch of bears names and continued to push the boundaries. He started touching them and interacting with mother bears and their cubs, which was particularly surprising considering how protective mother bears can be over their young, and by doing this he was able to capture some really incredible close-up shots for the time. Through his photography he attracted some corporate sponsors like Patagonia and most importantly the camera company Minolta, and in 1998 he was able to upgrade his equipment and start video recording everything. And that was also when he decided to venture to another area of the Katmai National Park. From then on he split his summers in two parts of the park. At the beginning of the summers he would set up camp in Hallow Bay. Then towards the end of the summer, he would move to the Cufflia Bay area, which was where the wilderness was a lot more unforgiving. In that area, there was thick greenery with bear paths carved through it, which he would call the Grizzly Maze. And these locations were so secluded, he would need to be flown in. On camera, he acted very passionately about the bears and remained calm when he was surrounded by them. He was recording footage to educate people on the bears and to hopefully be able to make his own show. He filmed footage and narrated what he was saying, as well as spoke to the camera. And one of the things that he reiterated to the camera was that he could die out there.
Really a good chance this year that I'm actually going to die or something. And if I do, well, I do it with the love and devotion in my heart for this work and for these animals and for something I just know is right. I just know it's good. I know what I'm doing is good. Be warned. I will die for these animals. I will die for these animals. I will die for these animals. But there are times when my life is on the precipice of death and that these bears can bite. They can kill. If I am weak, I go down. I love them with all my heart. I will protect them. I will die for them.
But year after year passed where he made it out alive. He believed he developed a sense of mutual trust and respect with the animals, but what he didn't trust were the people in the area.
And I came up and put my hand on his shoulder, and oh boy, you never saw a person so frightened in all of his life. He kind of fell on the ground and he starts making bear noises. And anyhow, I said, Timothy, I'm not going to hurt you or anything. I just want to talk to you. And the only words I ever heard from Timothy were, I just want to be left alone.
But there were some people that Tim liked to be around. One of them was long-time co-worker, friend, and ex-girlfriend, Jewel Palavac. She would help him organize his trips to Alaska, and she was credited as one of the authors on his 1997 book. They also founded Grizzly People, a non-profit group devoted to educating people and protecting bears and their habitat worldwide. She was his closest friend, and because he was estranged from his family, she was his power of attorney and the heir to his estate. Tim even wrote and signed a note to the Park Service claiming that he had no living relatives, and if he were to be killed, then his belongings and remains should be given to Jewel. But even though him being harmed was a real possibility, she knew that when he mentioned it on camera, it was for the purposes of trying to make a compelling show. Not necessarily because he actually thought that.
He was very dramatic. The inevitability, I might not make it, this might be my last time, which were all very true, but I really don't think he didn't want it. He really
didn't want it.
didn't
He was
have
hamming it up too. It was
death-
dramatic
yeah.
and it was good
He
television.
didn't have a death wish.
For Tim, there was a host of other issues he was far more concerned about. He was very protective of the bears in the national park, and he believed his presence helped deter poachers and trophy hunters. He even came across a structure erected amongst the trees, which was likely used by poachers or trophy hunters to hang an animal up and butcher them.
Well, a very dramatic discovery here in the raging riverside of the Grizzly Sanctuary. Here where there are lots of moose, it appears a moose poaching operation. This heavy bar put across here, tied on securely so that you can cut up game such as moose, possibly bears. Some people were here for a while. Wood set up to heat, but clearly this is a poaching operation and Grizzly People has discovered it.
He told a reporter for the Davis Enterprise in 1997, "I'm their lifeguard. I'm there to keep the poachers and sport hunters away. I'm much more likely to be killed by an angry sport hunter than a bear." To spread awareness about the threats the bears were under, he visited many schools and spoke to many children about them. His efforts were even recognized by Leonardo DiCaprio, who donated $25,000 to Grizzly People. But not everyone could recognize what he was doing as good. Ever since he started camping at the national park, he was at odds with the Park Service. According to the file kept on Treadwell, Rangers reported he had at least 6 violations from 1994 to 2003. Included among these violations were guiding tourists without a license, camping in the same area longer than the National Park Service's 7-day limit, improper food storage, wildlife harassment, and conflicts with visitors and their guides. Tim also annoyed rangers because he refused to carry a can of bear spray and put up an electric fence around his tent. When he did start camping there, he did have bear spray with him and had to use it once. In his book, he talked about needing to use bear spray on a bear that was becoming increasingly more aggressive with him and was starting to charge at him. After it, he felt terrible and profusely apologized to the bear. But he understood it was for the best because while it was illegal for anyone to carry guns in the park, people still did it. And now that he had maced this bear, it was unlikely to get shot for charging at somebody else. He did eventually stop bringing the mace with him for the last few years he camped with the bears. A bear lover and conservation activist, Ronald Dixon was Tim's biggest financial backer. It was mostly because of Ronald that Tim was able to go on these trips to Alaska. But much like the Rangers, he didn't like that Tim didn't bring bear spray with him and warned Tim that if he didn't bring spray, he would withdraw his financing. Tim would tell Ronald that he would bring bear spray, but then Ronald would see a quote from Tim somewhere saying that he didn't feel it was right for him to bring bear spray. Tim would send Ronald letters with updates of his adventures, and Ronald released one of those letters. In it, he further explained why he didn't want to bring bear spray. People who knowingly enter bear habitat with pepper spray, guns, and electric fences are committing a crime to the animals. They begin with the accepted idea of bringing instruments of pain to animals. If they are that fearful, then they have no place in the land of this perfect animal. Deborah Liggett, the superintendent of the Katmai National Park at the time, told Anchorage News Daily in 2001 that, at best, he's misguided, at worst, he's dangerous. If Timothy models unsafe behavior, that ultimately puts bears and other visitors at risk. After a while, she also met up with him and had coffee with him to discuss his activity at the park. In a recount she told of their interaction, she said that none of my staff would ever forgive him if they had to kill a bear because of him. I kind of had a heart-to-heart with him. I told him that if we had any more violations from him, we would petition the U.S. magistrate to ban him from the park. And this caused him to become very angry towards the Park Service.
You mother Park Service, I beat your asses. I protected the animal. I did it.
But despite butting heads with the Park Service, what he was doing was seen as very valuable by some people. He went on a whole bunch of shows to talk about what he was doing.
It's so funny to me. Timothy just said he's nervous. You live with grizzly bears.
It's a beautiful thing what you do, by the way, and I admire you for it, and I wish you great success.
Now, when you're with these grizzly bears, you're surrounded by them. They're very close to you. Is that how you live with them?
Yes, I always give them respect and lots of room because, you know, a grizzly's the boss out there.
But you interact with them?
It's important that every bear knows who I am and that I fit on their hierarchy if I'm to survive.
Is it going to happen that one day we read a news article about you being eaten by one of these bears?
No, you know,
Disney even invited him to Orlando, Florida to help them make the Brother Bear movie. He showed the Disney animators hours of his footage so that they could see how the bears ran, played, fished, and socialized together. By 2001, his work was known far and wide, and he had no plans of stopping. Throughout his time in the wild, he also created a bond with foxes in the Hallow Bay area. He named them and spent a whole bunch of time with them. They would follow him around and allow him to be far more hands-on with them than any bear would allow.
And you realize he has this gorgeous fur, and people are trying to kill him for it. If they knew how beautiful he was and how sweet he was, they would never hurt him.
And he didn't persuade any of these animals with food. They just really seemed to welcome him as a part of their surroundings. It got to the point where Tim was in some bears' lives their whole life, from the point they were a cub to the point where they were an adult. And because of the close bond he had with these bears, he felt comfortable bringing other people in close proximity to them. He brought a friend and filmmaker Joel Bennett to visit the bears, and he felt comfortable around them because he was with Tim.
Frankly, I never felt safer around anybody in the field in Alaska than I did around Tim. I've lived here for 36 years and I've spent thousands of hours around bears.
He also brought his girlfriend, Amie Huguenard, with him for parts of the summers in 2001, 2002, and 2003. Amie first read his book and then got the chance to meet him during a bear presentation he did in Boulder, Colorado. From then on, they formed a friendship, and even though she understood how dangerous it was to be amongst the bears, she accompanied him on his journeys. But if you've watched any of Tim's footage, you would have no idea that there was another person there with him. She was only seen on camera a couple of times. Part of the reason why was because Tim wanted to give off the illusion that he was there alone, and another part of the reason was because she just didn't want to be on camera. If he ever did try and record her, she would tell him, "It's about the bears." Even though her experiences with the bears weren't extensively filmed, she still had plenty of stories to tell about her time there. She told a former co-worker and friend, Kim Sullivan, about an encounter that she and Tim had with a bear when it charged them as they were crossing a river. Kim retold Amie's story to the LA Times. She said it was a 2-hour standoff, and she could feel the bear's breath on her. Despite these intense encounters, she still returned each year with Tim and was in the process of becoming more committed to him. She quit her job in Colorado on January 31st, 2003, and moved to Malibu where Tim lived. She even got a new job as a physician assistant in head trauma neurosurgery at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles, and she was going to start that job when she returned from Alaska that summer in 2003. But to start off that 2003 trip, Tim dropped a note off at his friends Mark and Marnie Gade's house on September 2nd. On the note it said, "It's September and I'm into the historically toughest and most exciting month. Tremendous storms and huge gatherings of extremely hungry bears. More and more darkness, intense isolation. I'm going to make it, unless one of the killer bears gets me. There are plenty this year. Lots of beautiful, sweet bears, but as my work success takes greater effect, more tough, dominant, giant male bears come back. to their rightful place, to rule free of poachers. As soon as Tim arrived in Alaska, he noticed that the bears were more food aggressive than how they had usually been. There had been unforeseen weather conditions that caused the berry crop along the Katmai coast to fail, and the bears were relying on those berries to gain calories for hibernation, but without them, they had to rely on mostly salmon. Footage paired with Tim's diary entries in the show The Diary of a Grizzly Man revealed that bigger bears would normally leave scraps behind of fish, but that year, they weren't leaving anything behind.
These bears are trying extremely hard to survive. When you put 20 or 30 bears in a small area competing for fish, it can get rough.
I'm very concerned for the bears in the grizzly maze as the giant males are controlling the scraps right to the bitter end. Normally, after 1 or 2 days of a run, the third or fourth day, they let it go, they relinquish it to the smaller bears. Not this time. They're hanging on to it, they're showing their power, they're flexing their muscles.
And on multiple occasions, bears were coming too close to his tent, which he believed could have been the beginning of the end for him.
A bear came quietly close to camp. That's worrisome. These are the kinds of bears that take tents down. Can't worry about that. Just have to keep a very clean, food-perfect camp and trust that with no rewards, the bears will just leave the tent standing. When I attempted to return to my tent, I found another bear curiously investigating the camp. It was truly a dangerous situation. The bear's body moving into hyperphagia, the big f***ing appetite. What they eat now will be their reserve for the winter months, and deep inside, they know it. The bears were getting closer and closer to camp, and once they descended on the camp, the tents would most probably be destroyed. I had a problem. The bear left the area. Was it gone for good? Maybe. Then again, this might have been the beginning of my end.
Even though in the past Tim had played up his looming death for the cameras, his seemingly genuine concerns about the bears that year had manifested in the form of a dream where a bear killed him.
That night, I dreamed of being dropped and eaten by a bear. Eaten alive. It was all very real. Cannot ever get into my psyche. I'm a myth. I am a myth, and as long as I live it, I will survive.
And this sort of added tension may have caused Amie to become on edge because according to both their journal entries, Amie was not happy. Amie had written in hers that they had been arguing and emphasized that it would be her last summer in Alaska with him. And Tim wrote in his that Amie said he was hell-bent on destruction, but fortunately Tim's dream didn't come true and they made it out of there safely. On September 26th, they got on the plane and flew back to Kodiak, which was the nearest town with an airport. There, Tim stored away his camping equipment in his friend Kathleen Parker's basement and then headed back to the airport. Their flight was for Los Angeles, but Tim wanted to change it to an airport near Denali Park. He wanted to do a driving trip around the park to get some extra footage and photos, but he decided to cancel that driving trip when he wasn't happy with the cost of the change fee, and part of the reason why he wasn't happy with it was because of the attitude of the customer service worker. So instead of just going onward to Los Angeles like how they had planned, he decided to cancel everything and go back to the bears. But because it was raining so heavily, they couldn't immediately fly back to Kuflia Bay. They spent 3 days in Kodiak waiting, and on the 29th of September, they returned to the bears. Tim set up his camp in an area that was dense with greenery. That was the place that he called the Grizzly Maze, and a diagram was drawn for where Tim set up his camp exactly. The dotted lines show all of the bear trails around him, so he was pretty much surrounded by bear trails. Tim would usually never be there at that time of the year because that was when bears were at their most aggressive, because they were needing as much food as they could possibly get before hibernation. But he really wanted to try and find a bear that he had named Downy that he hadn't seen yet. And while he was having a hard time finding Downy, a new bear that he had never seen before appeared in the area. It was an old aggressive bear he named Ole, who did actually try and attack him.
Ole and I have kind of a weird relationship. I think we're doing much better now. Ole on the secret path yesterday, I saw him, I gave him room, I spoke kindly to you, and to Ole, and he attacked me. You attacked. And I was able to hold him off, not in any fisticuffs or clawdicuffs, but just by being tough enough to stand up to him, and he did back down. Thank goodness for me.
Ole was a bit edgy and slightly suspicious of me. That I credited to the fact that it was simply weird for Ole to have a human near him in such a remote location. All the other bears currently around are longtime friends. But I have to be careful of the old guy. He's having a tough time, and my dead body would solve his problem. The skinny old male is in sheer sensory decline. I felt for him, but would remain wary.
On October 4th, just a couple of days before he was going to leave, he did end up seeing Downy flopping around in the water looking for fish. Later that day, he called the air taxi pilot Willie Fulton on satellite phone. He called to confirm Willie was still good to pick him and Amie up on the 6th. He also said, "Let me just tell you, just between Amie, myself, and you, every fish ran, every bear was here. We made the best friggin' choice of our lives. Once the rain settled down, boy, it was amazing out here." Then the next day, on October 5th, Tim phoned Jewel. He told her he saw Downy and asked if she could call the airline and pretend that she was Amie so that she could book the plane tickets for both him and Amie. So Jewel called the airline and booked 2 seats together for Tim and Amie to go to Los Angeles. And then on October 6th, Willie went to go collect Tim and Amie.
Pretty nasty looking bear that I had seen here before is just sneaking slow with his head down. Just the meanest looking thing, you know, coming through the brush. And so I jumped on the airplane real quick and untied it and took off, turned around, flew over camp there. Just looked down and saw a human rib cage, you know, that I knew had to be either Tim or Amie laying there. And every time I would come over, he'd just start eating faster and faster and crouch over this rib cage.
When Willie returned to Kodiak, he notified the authorities, and park rangers first showed up at the scene an hour later, and they were charged by a bear soon after arriving. So they fired 11 shots at the bear, and it died 5 meters away from them. And as the shooting was happening, the Alaskan state troopers also showed up. They saw a bear's cache near Tim and Amie's campsite, and basically a bear creates a cache when they have killed more than they can eat, so they store it somewhere that they can come back to later to finish eating. And on the ground near the cache, they saw some kind of organ that appeared to be a kidney, and sticking directly out of the cache was Amie's hand. And when they later exhumed it, they found Amie's head also in the cache. When they scouted around the bear trails, they found Tim's head with a bit of his spine still attached, and they also found his arms with a wristwatch attached to his wrist still. But with the daylight diminishing, they packed up as much of Tim and Amie's campsite as they could in a hurried fashion. Included in what they packed up was Tim's video camera, 2 cameras, and both Amie and Tim's journals. And as they were packing all of that stuff up, they were approached by another smaller bear. They yelled at it and fired a warning shot, but it kept pursuing them. So the bear was unfortunately shot until it fell to the ground, but it started to move again, so they continued to fire shots at it until it was definitely dead. After that, they left with the gear and body parts they had. Andrew Airways, the company Willie worked for, advised authorities Tim had a business partner who had made the arrangements with them, and the business partner was Jewel, and she was contacted shortly after. They informed her of what happened, but she had already been told by Andrew Airways. The authorities then asked her if she could get Amie's next of kin details. She could get the details, but she needed to go to Tim's house first to get them. She also asked for Tim's journal and cameras. She then called back the next morning with Amie's family's details. That was also when the troopers returned to Tim and Amie's campsite to examine the bears they shot. When they arrived, they found the smaller bear had been mostly eaten by other bears already. Only the head and some flesh and bone remained. The teeth of the bear suggested it was only 3 years old. The bigger bear had broken canines and teeth worn down to the gums, but they were still able to tell that it was 28 years old. That bear hadn't been touched by the other bears, so they were able to open him up and look at what was inside of him. And inside of his belly were exclusively human body parts and clothing. The investigation report said approximately 25 pounds of muscle, adipose tissue, and skin were removed. Bone fragments were prevalent. Rib, foot, pelvis, and vertebrae fragments were identifiable, but most were too small for gross identification. Much dark blonde hair, about 45 centimeters long, was present, as was an esophagus and trachea. When word of their deaths spread, a member of the Sierra Club contacted authorities to express that Tim's death was most likely committed by a hunter due to past run-ins with poachers. They requested an autopsy and were informed that an autopsy had already been scheduled. But most people automatically assumed that Tim and Amie had been attacked by a bear. Barry Gilbert, who survived an attack while researching bears in Yellowstone National Park, said days after Tim and Amie's death that when he was attacked, it happened very quickly and they probably suffered very little. Then, as Tim's belongings were being investigated, Tim's video camera was looked at. Over the span of his last 5 years in Alaska, he recorded 100 hours of video footage, and 6 minutes of that footage is an audio recording of his death. Using the timestamps on the footage, they were able to determine the start of Tim and Amie's death began at 1:47 p.m. When it was discovered, Jewel had her lawyer petition the state to ensure that it was never released. According to the investigation report, copies of the tape were made but were later destroyed, and copies stored on the work computers were also deleted. Since Jewel received Tim's filming equipment, she should be the only one with the tape. According to the recounts of the tape in the investigation report, this is what happened. Amie is inside their sleeping tent and Tim is outside of it. In the tape, it is noticeably windy and raining. The first voice heard in the tape is Amie asking if the bear was still out there or not. Then Tim indicates he is being attacked and beckons to Amie to come out and help him. The sound of a zipper opening is heard, likely Amie exiting the tent. Amie made many high-pitched screams, telling the bear to get away and telling Tim to play dead. Playing dead seemed to have worked because the bear retreated. A very brief conversation starts as Amie makes her way to Tim, but the bear returns. The attack recommences and Amie screams at him to fight back, and then Tim screams to hit it with the frying pan. There were also virtually no noises made by the bear. It sounds like Amie is closer to the camera microphone and Tim is further away. Towards the end, Tim's cries begin to fade and the sound of dragging could be heard, suggesting that Tim was being dragged into the bushes. The tape ends after 6 minutes when the tape in the camera runs out. In the documentary Grizzly Man, Jewel played the tape for Werner Herzog to listen to, and he advised her to never listen to it and destroy it.
I hear rain and I hear, Amie, get away, go away.
A handful of other people who were allowed to listen to the tape described some of what they heard.
Audio tape recordings recovered from the scene of those fatal maulings on Katmai indicate that Timothy Treadwell was the first to die while his companion watched.
It's probably the worst thing I've listened to in my career.
And I heard shouts. Amie was shouting. Timothy was moaning, growling, and trying to speak. I clearly can hear her screaming, "Stop and go away."
On the tape, Huguenot is heard telling Treadwell to play dead. Then she tells him to fight back.
It sounds like he did, in fact, start playing dead, and the bear walked away for a short period of time. But it sounded like the bear came back and resumed the attack. At that point, she coached him to fight back. He asked her to throw things at the bear.
He called Amie, come out here and hit this bear over the head with a frying pan. It's killing me.
And I hear Amie beating on the top of this bear's head with a frying pan. And Timothy is saying, "Run away, let go. Run away, Amie. Run away." The level of her screams, the intensity of the screams increased, and then the tape stopped.
The investigation concluded Treadwell and Huguenot died from a bear attack that might have been avoided by adhering to basic principles of camping in bear country. And much like how we'll never know exactly what happened that afternoon, we'll never know which bear it was that killed Amie and Tim. But it's believed that it was more than likely the bear Tim named Oli. Bear viewing guide Gary Porter says, "I think Timmy made a fundamental anthropomorphic error, naming them and hanging around with them as long as he did. He probably forgot they were bears, and maybe they forgot some of the time he was human." So it seems at the very end, Amie and Tim were treated like other bears, just how Tim wanted.
In the bear kingdom, bears kill bears. Bears have fight with each other every day.
You know what, come on, at the end of the day, wasn't mauled and killed because he was in their face with a camera or getting too close with the video. He was treated by perhaps a sub-adult bear like another bear.
In the wake of their deaths, there were mixed reactions. A lot of people believe Tim did what he did for the wrong reasons. His claims about poaching were called into question. A number of people said that he either stretched the truth about poaching or that it hadn't been an issue in Katmai National Park for many years.
One day it was brought to my attention that there was a brochure being put out, and inside the brochure was a picture of a person that he had underneath their poacher stalking Tabitha. Well, the picture was my guide, Joe. And Joe is well known around here in Kodiak. I didn't think there was any problems with poaching. And he says, well, there may not be, but I want to make sure nobody bothers my bears.
Poaching is not as big a concern around here as it has been in Russia, for instance, and some other locations. For the most part, here on Kodiak and on the Alaska Peninsula, it is a very rare occurrence in the last 20 years.
He also had a failed acting career, and some people believed he only did what he did for the fame he didn't get through acting.
Perhaps it was just that he wanted to become famous, and that was his way of doing it.
But regardless of what people thought, he truly had an intense love and respect for the bears, and how it ended and what happened to the two bears is the last thing he ever would have wanted.
I bet at the very end was sad to his core and shocked that it actually was happening to him.
The tough thing out of all this is Tim would have never wanted to see any bears killed. Even if they had killed him, he would have been happy if nobody found him.
It was because of his passion and love for the bears that caused Amie to fall in love with him and voluntarily go with him on these journeys. Amie's sister, Kathy Stowell, said it was part of her life. She definitely died, according to her, in the most beautiful, pristine place on earth. They knew it was extremely dangerous, but they had a passion and that overrode everything. Because of obstacles and logistics, most people are too afraid to follow their heart. However, people who do are courageous and inspiring. While there's no denying Tim got too confident and made mistakes on his final trip there, those who knew him in real life can attest that Tim did have something special with those bears.
He was a little smarter than everyone gave him credit for. He made it out here a long time before they caught up with him.
Even bear guides who had a combative relationship with Tim saw firsthand how Tim really became at one with the bears. John Rogers, who was a spectator to Tim during the 13 summers he went there, said Timothy Treadwell was not the foolhardy person the media portrays him to be. Contrary to his media image, Timothy was not one to blithely walk up to a bear. He was cautious, even fearful, around bears he didn't know, but he developed relationships and mutual trust with a few individual bears over the years. Another bear guide, Brad Josephs, who also had a tumultuous relationship with Tim, had nothing but respect and nice things to say about him.
I understand Treadwell, and he made some mistakes, but he definitely saw the bears as something very special, and I can sympathize with him very, very much. And we always need to remember that he was one of the ones that really brought attention to these fantastic special bears, and so I wish people wouldn't be so disrespectful when they talk about him.
Ultimately, this was a very avoidable tragedy for Amie, Tim, and the two bears. But the biggest tragedy and disrespect to the bears is the bear hunting that is allowed all throughout Alaska today. Tim traveled across the United States to raise awareness for them, and if he were alive today, he would still be advocating for the bears. If you would like to help finish what Tim started, there will be some resources in the description box below. Anyways, that's everything for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and let's take a moment of silence for Tim, Amie, the two bears, and any other bear that has been poached or killed for sport. And I will see you in my next video.
Animals rule.